Shri P. Chidambaram ji, please.
Honorable Deputy Chairman, the budget for 2025-26 was presented 8 weeks ago. Today, nobody talks about the budget because, as we pointed out in that debate, it did not help anybody except the 3.2 crore income tax payers. All other sections of the people are in the same situation. What do they face? We have pointed out several times, and the Lok Sabha also pointed out in the debate on the finance bill. As a nation, we are facing rising unemployment, inflation in food, education and healthcare, stagnant wages according to government's figures, falling consumption, depreciating currency, rising household debt, the lowest household financial savings, and a government that has mercilessly cut budgeted expenditure in the current year, budgeted expenditure on health, education, social welfare, agriculture, rural development, urban development, midday meal scheme, Jal Jeevan Mission, scholarships for SC and ST and so on. These figures cannot be contradicted, and they were not contradicted because the figures are printed in the budget papers. We asked several questions, and I'm sorry to say we got no answers. Actually, the budget has vanished without a trace. Wherever I go, wherever I speak, nobody remembers the budget, nobody discusses it. We are in the second stage now. This is the finance bill and the appropriation bill. I'd like to speak about only two things. One is the fiscal policy, and the second is the threat of a tariff war. My colleagues will speak about other matters. On fiscal policy, the Honorable Finance Minister said in her speech, and I quote, "Our endeavour will be to keep the fiscal deficit each year such that the central government debt remains on a declining path as a percentage of the GDP. The intent was good, the intent is good. And in fact, in an interview, I complimented the Honorable Finance Minister when they asked me, what do I have to say to compliment the government? I said their intent to maintain the fiscal deficit and a declining path for FD to GDP is commendable. Now, I'm afraid, looking at the performance, we have to reconsider that statement. When this government assumed office on May 2014, the fiscal deficit at the end of the previous year was 4.5%. Kindly keep that number, 4.5%, according to their own official numbers. In the middle of this government's tenure, the FD improved to 3.4% in 2018-19. But at the end of 24-25, it will be 4.8%. You start with 4.5, improve it to 3.9, and then decline to 4.8. So effectively, the country's economy is back to where it started. The government, of course, will say COVID happened. I agree. COVID did dent the economy of the country. But every government faces crisis. The previous governments, the governments previous to the BJP government, NDA government, faced an Asian financial crisis, the international financial crisis, and the Taper Tantrum. So there's no point blaming external crises. It's your business, it's the government's business to manage the economy, control the fiscal deficit, and make sure that the declining path which you proclaimed is sustained. So on fiscal policy, I'm afraid I have to give the government a very low pass. Not fail, but it's a low pass. The other point which the Honorable Finance Minister made was, we are on a declining path as a percentage of GDP, but that's not borne out by the record. According to the fiscal policy strategy statement laid by the Honorable Finance Minister on the floor of Parliament, the debt to GDP ratio will be 57.1% in 2024-25. 57.1. When they assumed office, it was 51%. It worsened to 61.4%. Compared to 61.4, 57.1 is certainly a declining path. But compared to 51% debt to GDP, when they assumed office, we are worse. The claim of a declining path is wrong. It rose, declined. There's no guarantee it will continue to decline. It may happen as it happened 4 years ago. It may rise again. The fiscal policy is correct, but the claim that the debt to GDP is on a declining path is hopelessly wrong. On this count, the government's grade is fail with a capital F. On the fiscal policy strategy statement, I read it more than once. I didn't find any policy strategy. For the present, I shall not say more than this. Unless the gross tax revenue to the GDP improves beyond 12%, you can't have a fiscal policy. Now, what is the record of this government? For the last 10 years, mark my words, sir, for the last 10 years, the gross tax revenue, GTR, to GDP is stuck between 11.15% and 11.64%. For 10 years, it is stuck in this narrow groove. Despite amendments to the Income Tax Act, despite redoubling efforts to raise revenue, despite tweaking the GST, the gross tax revenue stuck between 11.15 and 11.64 for 10 years. So what is the confidence this government gives us that the GTR to GDP will rise and therefore we can have a fiscal policy? Without revenues, you cannot have a fiscal policy. I'm afraid I cannot find any fiscal strategy in the fiscal policy statement. In the section on indirect taxes, the Honorable Finance Minister mentioned several things. For example, removal of 7 tariff rates, concessional duty on life-saving drugs, the reduction of basic duty on critical minerals, the tariff increase on knitted fabrics, exemption to 35 capital goods, some steps to promote exports, and some other measures. So far, so good. What she mentioned is so far, so good. But what did she not mention in the speech? Is it because they were not important? Or is it because, for the sake of brevity, she omitted them? I'm skeptical, sir. Because what she failed to mention were crucial matters. In 17 chapters of the Customs Tariff Act, the FM has made significant reductions in basic duties. Thank God, at long last, the government is giving up protectionism. We have screamed from the rooftops, protectionism is not the way to protect the economy. They are mixing up protectionism and patriotism. We can be patriot, but you don't have to follow protectionism. Protectionism is the antithesis of free trade. That is the first lesson in trade economics. Protectionism is the antithesis of free trade. It is a wrong policy. Dr. Panagaraya said it's a wrong policy. Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati said it's a wrong policy. Niti Aayog said it's a wrong policy. It fell on deaf ears. What we say, of course, always falls on deaf ears. But their own Niti Aayog, their own vice chairman, said protectionism is wrong. Finally, they moved away from protectionism. How protectionist is our economy? According to the WTO, India's simple average final bound tariff is 50.8%. With most favored nation, the trade-weighted average is 12%. These two numbers is a measure of how protectionist we were in the last 10 years. I did not expect the Honorable FM to mention in her speech all the duty reductions. But she should have certainly said in the speech, it's there in the annexure, certainly said in the speech that she has reduced customs duty on motor vehicles, passenger cars, goods transport vehicles, motorcycles, even bicycles, and even toys. These were tucked away in an annexure, which she did not read and most people do not read. On passenger cars, the reduction is from 125% to 70%. On motorcycles, the famous Harley-Davidson, 100% to 70%. On bicycles, the reduction is from 35 to 20. On toys, the reduction is from 70 to 20. Is this a genuine change of heart? Is it a genuine change of policy? I don't believe so. I think this is the effect of Mr. Donald Trump. The Trump effect has forced the government to reduce these duties. Finally, sir, I want to speak about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is tariffs, and there's a lot of discussion on tariffs. President Trump has made it clear that he will launch a tariff war on April 2. He's made it clear to no less than the Honorable Prime Minister. When Mr. Modi protested, he said, I don't care, I will impose tariffs on India. If he presses tariffs on India on April 2, what is the government's response? What is India's response? There has been no statement of policy, no discussion in Parliament, no consultation with opposition parties. The government is holding its cards close to its chest, if it has any cards at all. Contrast the openness of the Prime Minister of Canada. The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, his approach is a mark of democracy, transparency. Now, the Honorable Finance Minister announced some tariff reductions on February 1 in the budget. Obviously, Mr. Trump is not satisfied. The digital service tax of 6% was withdrawn on Tuesday. Newspaper reports say that more tariff concessions are under discussion. In his interview to the podcaster, the Prime Minister lavished fulsome praise on Mr. Modi. Now, first they tried concessions on February 1. Mr. Trump was not satisfied. They tried flattery. He doesn't seem to be satisfied. If concessions and flattery have failed, and if tariffs are going to be imposed on our exports on April 2, I want to know, what is the government's response? A tariff war will be in breach of the WTO, multilateral and bilateral trade agreements, and international conventions. It will wreck the world economy. It will ruin the economies of developing countries. A tariff war will lead to a trade war. The whole world will be hurt. Let me caution the government. If a tariff war and a trade war is unleashed, I'm finishing in 10 seconds. If a tariff war and a trade war is unleashed, it will lead to depressed exports, lower FDI, higher inflation, and currency depreciation. The RBI bulletin for March 25, I don't want to read it, warns us of the effect of a trade war. The Ministry of Finance's own report released yesterday has the same warning. And the Ministry of Finance finally says, after repeating the warnings, if the private sector were to invest in the economy, it will overpower the risks. They've been saying that for the last 3 years. But the private sector does not seem to share. The private sector saying there are sane voices in the world. Canada, Britain, France, Germany, European Union, Japan. India must stand with the sane voices, and do everything, collective action, to prevent a tariff war and a trade war. And I expect answers to these very important questions in the Honourable Finance Minister's reply.
Thank you.